Yeah, well, I'm interested in Icelandic folklore in general. It's not like my most interest lies in magic and sorcery, you know. My favorite stories are the trolls. And of course, trolls are related to magic. Magic is related to everything in Iceland because magic is so important in the culture. Only for an example, when you look into languages, for example, the Inuits in Greenland, they have almost, I think, 60 words, which means snow.
Yes.
You know, some country in Southeast Asia where they grow bamboo trees, they have 50 words only for the tree bamboos, and we only have one word, bamboos. In Iceland, we have up to 40 years for the word galdur, magic, and which tells us that magic and sorcery was always important in the culture. And that, I think, makes it quite interesting that how much galdur infected the culture, not only 1,000 years ago, but also the last decades, the last century. So it is really part of our history. I don't practice magic myself, but some people think I do. No, I don't. I don't have the knowledge for it. I have not studied enough. But still, I believe that it is possible to do magic, you know, in many different ways. But you have to do it correct. And in my mind, the most important magic that we are using every day without knowing it, it all fits into this wonderful word in Icelandic called a von, hope in English. Because if you don't have any hope, and if you don't work on hoping and do something that could make tomorrow a little more tolerable than yesterday, then the life is useless. If you're always negative against the future, you will probably have a terrible life. But only with this word, hope, and positivity, you can make the greatest magic ever. And I think we are all doing it every day without knowing that, because it's not easy to survive in Iceland. Not then, and it still is not.
Magic and black magic, svart galdur, and white magic, hvít galdur.
No, really, I don't do that. For me, magic is just magic, and no matter if it's for good and bad or bad. I think that's the only answer I can give for it. You know, some people call black magic something that is hurting somebody else, making people sick and stuff like that. But for me, it's all magic. You know, it all has the same root, and at least here, the Nordic magic and the magic that has been practicing in Iceland. Maybe if we would look at the ideas of magic, you know, somewhere in South America, Africa, it's a totally different thing, other ideas, and sometimes it's more dark than we have here, like voodoo and stuff like that. I would point that out as a black magic, you know. But here in Iceland, I don't divide it, actually. For me, it's just magic. It's simple.
Icelandic magician, gentleman.
Yeah, my favorite and probably the most famous one is definitely Svanur in Svanshóll in Bjarnarfjörður. He grew up in Bjarnarfjörður, and he is actually the only person in Strandir that is mentioned in the old Icelandic sagas. And he was a great sorcerer, and he could change the weather how he would like to have it, and he had his own tunnel through many mountains to the place where he went out fishing, and just a great sorcerer, and for my belief the greatest of all. And he fits in the same category as, for example, Bárður Snæfellsás, when he walks into the mountain and he becomes part of nature and is very much celebrated. And there are not many persons like that. It is Svanur, it is Bárður Snæfellsás, and maybe only few others. So in my mind, Svanur is the greatest one and my most favorite. But it's a long time ago since he was around. But still, we talk about him. You know, when we have a special kind of weather with very thick fog, then we think about Svanur, and it reminds us of his magic skills. So it's more or less connected to the weather. And it's just a text that is actually following it. Sounds like this. Fjón þvæ ég af mér, fjanda minna, rán og reiði ríkra manna. And this more or less just describes the meaning and the usage of this magic sign, the Ægishjálmur, this very effective sign. No, I don't have it anywhere here. First of all, a protection sign, and for you, it's just to give you courage to keep on your journey and keep on your life, and not at least, which is maybe the more important when you think about it in modern life, is that this sign is also a magic against abuse of power. And if people think that it was used for that 1,000 years ago, then I think we have still maybe more use for it than before, because I think we are going through a terrible time in politics, and where democracy is actually being stepped down. So this magic is quite important. Then I sometimes use invocations, and that is more commercial. You know, it's a kind of small act I have, and those poems, they are by Jón Lærði Guðmundsson, and called Snjáfjallarímur, part of them, because they are more than 90 verses, if I remember that correct, and usually I just use something like 6, 7, or 8 of them. But it's true that you say that many of those invocations, especially the ones that are mentioned to wake up dead people, they are all lost. We don't know what poems they are, but Jón Lærði Guðmundsson, at least, I believe that magic exists, that galdur exists. I think it's quite important to believe in it. Like I described before, yes. Is that, you know, if you don't believe in that yourself, your inner self, and your spirit and your soul and everything, this whole universe that your body is around, if you don't believe that you can use it for more than just work for somebody else to make your life better, then I think you have a miserable life. So I believe in magic, that it is possible to tame it and have benefit from it. I think I have seen a ghost that we call sometimes draugur. I was very afraid of it, but it's very, you know, we get quite tense when you see it. But I'm not sure about it, you know, but I think so. I have never seen huldufólk myself, but still I am convinced of that world really exists, and it makes me more comfortable to believe in that and accept it. It makes me more secure about myself. It makes me more secure when I'm just traveling alone up on the mountains, that believe that there are some other world around me than this one I'm living in, this world that is just laying next to us and we cannot really approach it, not everybody. And especially from the fact that my beloved grandmother, she spoke to the hidden people, and I believe her. I will never call my grandmother a liar. So, and since she told me that, and since she told me that she communicated with them, then I cannot do anything else but believe it. And it is safer. You feel more comfortable, and you are more secure about your own children. And I love this idea, because in my mind, the idea of the hidden people, of the hidden world, is a kind of wonderful idea of the first ideas of you know, protecting the environment. That you yourself, you accept that you are part of the world. You are not over it. You are just part of it. You are inside of it, and once you accept it, then you need to be more aware about the nature itself, and also join those people that really wants to protect it and take care of it. And only if everybody in the world would think like that, think how wonderful this planet would be.
I have for a long time believed in trolls and all these mythical creatures, but not necessarily in a way that, you know, that they are truly there and there are little people everywhere. I more believe in them in so that they are a metaphor for something else. For example, trolls would be a metaphor for something bad that happens. For example, there was a troll living up on that mountain over there called Þuríður, and she used to throw down rocks and avalanches when she was angry. But so Þuríður is a metaphor for these happenings and these bad things, because trolls are always bad. You know, when they walk, they shake the ground and make earthquakes, and when they're angry, they throw down the snow and make big storms and so on. But the elves are different. The elves are fair, mythical creatures. They are wise, and they are kind of, you know, the grass beyond the fence, if you can say so. They are perfect humans, but they are more of a symbol for nature, for me at least. They are, you know, nature is beautiful and nature is, you know, powerful. And if you don't treat nature really well, you get punished for it. It's the same if you don't treat the elves well, you get punished for it, and which is, you know, you gotta treat it with respect. You know, in one way you can have, you know, you can be hunting seal or whale or fish or going hiking somewhere and all is good. But as soon as you fish too much, you go too far and you damage something, bad things will happen to you. You know, your fish will be finished and your seal will be finished, or you can have bad weather if you go too far and die. So, and the dwarves, they are always, you know, little things in life. They tease us. They are the ones that, you know, go to your house and you're maybe working with some tools, and then you put your tools down on the table and then you come back, they're not there. You know, they are the ones that are hiding your tools all the time, and the ones who are, if you can say, teasing you. You know, they put their leg in your way and you trip and fall or something like that. Little things, but they never, you know, mean anything bad by it. But for example, my grandfather, he was once working in his garage fixing his car, and he had a wrench in his hand and put it on the table, and he was in really a big hurry. I went to look for something else, and then he came back and he couldn't find the wrench anywhere. And he turned around and yelled into the garage, "I don't have time for this!" And then he turned around, a wrench was there. You know? I've been, you know, I do like to go hiking a lot, and I sometimes go too far, and often I'm in, you know, in my tent, and there's a really, really bad storm, and, you know, and you're just hoping, you know, you're hoping, just let me go this time, I'll never do it again. Or you get really afraid sometimes, you know, and you get, you know, I've been in an avalanche, and, you know, you get really nervous. And then that's a time where I myself take a step back and I look at what happened, I try to be more careful, and in that way I try to communicate. Uh, but there's a really recent one when they were building this tunnel that goes through that mountain. The townspeople here, they didn't ask nature's permission. They didn't ask the elves in the mountain permission to build the tunnel. So when they were halfway through, rocks started falling from the hills, and because they were damaging a lot of things, and some of the machinery was damaged, and trucks stopped working, and there was a guy who injured himself, and all of these things. And there was this man in town here who is believed he can like communicate with the other world, And so the road department, or the company who was working that tunnel, they got this man to go up into the mountain and ask for permission if they could go, and say he was sorry. But what they did also is, a lot of kids from the preschools here, they went up into the mountains, just singing songs for fun, and people were telling stories and grilling, and there was a little, they made a little bit, out of it. Made it also fun, and I think that's also really important, to use this to communicate with, people who have more imagination, like kids or something like that. And the guy eventually said that they got their permission, so they built the tunnels, and there haven't been any accidents since then. Yes, the Queen of Elves where? In Álfsfell? Or
Yes, it's
the Queen of Elves in Álfsfell, she had 8 sons and 8 daughters, and who were both kind and good. And you can see the mountain when you see it and you look at it and you stand next to it. You can see and you can feel how powerful the environment is by just looking at it. You look at it and you just, feel humbled and small. And that's how the Elf Queen makes you feel. She's beautiful and she's powerful, and she makes you feel like you're just a little bit vulnerable. And then she used to give the people, they could go hunt seals and fish, and the elements were always fighting. There's a big sand beach in front, which is the waves just hammer on the mountain constantly, on the beach. But if they went too far, the people, then they wouldn't have any seals anymore and any fish. And also the thing is that in that particular place and in the whole nature reserve, we got to think that also the nature won. We left the place about 100 years ago almost.
Elves can sing, and also we have in our Psalms book, Psalm that was, it is said that was heard in a Clint, what was sung by elves. And also, as I said before, the belief in elves was otherwise here in other countries, and also they were become more friendly and more and Christians, and also, as we said in Breiðabólstaður, it was not very good to understand some of the belief, and also in the Eddas, as to talk about the elves that were called ljósálfur, and it is said of it was not the same kind of elves as it was known in the 17th century. And also the belief in elves is common all over the world. And it is, what you can say, it is many that are not, have not many superstition. They don't think it is good to spoil places which is said that elves have. And it will be better not to do it. It could be dangerous. It is, I think it is many things so that although they thought that they not say that they will not believe in it. And also it is told here about Iceland horrible stories about people who did something against elves or places that should not be disturbed, and they had very bad luck after it. It is many new stories about it. Yes, also trúarfélagið. I remember that when it was thought only be joke, but also they are no missioners, mission of them, and they don't think about that. I think some of not religious thought it would be good to be in Ásatrúarfélagið instead of be out of without religion, and also it was thought that the bishop thought that it should not be allowed, but the minister of justice, minister of church, said it was not no matter to do them a favor to have it banned, and I think it is a very innocent society, and also many priests that I thought was rather conservative have the same opinion.
My great-grandfather was one of the men that built one of the first cabins in the highlands of Iceland. That was in the very early 1900s. And in one of the beds in the cabin, there's supposed to be a draugur, or a ghost, which keeps people awake that sleep in that bed. I myself have slept in that bed a couple of times, and I've not felt the presence of the draugur, but maybe he knows that I'm a relative of one of the guys that built the house, so he lets me alone. But I definitely believe that there might be souls of people that have wandered around in that area that are still around and are haunting people. I think it's mainly sensations, and I don't think it's. I don't know the story very well, unfortunately, but I think it's mainly that it's the sensations.
Well, of course, language is an extremely important part of the identity of a nation. Although I wouldn't be quite so categorical as saying that there cannot be a nation without a separate language. We can take the Irish as an example. The Irish have more or less lost their original Gaelic language, although it is talked on some peripheral areas, but they have managed with the English language to maintain an identity which has been a great part of their self-image and of their culture. Nevertheless, for a small nation as the Icelanders, it's of course immensely important to have a language that is with its own characteristics and which makes people able to express themselves freely, and also is a link with the past, insofar as we have text from the past in the language which we can appreciate, read and understand and appreciate and interpret. So in that sense, it's immensely important. It's also from if you look back to say around 1600, the Icelanders were well only 50 or 60,000 by then, and of course they were people in the world knew little about them, and what they knew was not very favorable. They told bad stories. So it was important for the Icelanders then to respect their own language and the traditions that were preserved in this language. So in mainly, I would answer your questions. Yes, it's very important, and although I wouldn't go so far as to say that a nation cannot exist without a separate language. But also, of course, you have to think of the fact that in many languages there are dialects or smaller languages in many nations or countries like yours, where you have many kinds of people and many languages, I know. But what is the main important thing for the Icelandic language to preserve it and to make it a modern tool is that it has so strong a position as a written language. It is a written language that is used in administration and in all aspects of life, although it has to defend itself, of course, against English in many new aspects, like the technological aspects, and it's not self-evident that it will survive for centuries onwards. I think in the same way as I said about the culture, the language will develop, change, but retain some kind of difference and identity in a long time into the future. It's quite right you were saying, it is changing, but you should not underestimate the possibilities that influences from the old culture can be expressed in modern media, in film, in novels and poetry, which is very different from that of the 19th or earlier centuries. So, as I said, I think it's changing. You may think it is deteriorating, but mainly if you judge it from a standard, rather rigid standard of how it was in the old times. It cannot be as it was in the old times. It's bound to change, but I believe that, as I say, with an effort, we can make it distinctive and use some influences, some ideas and trends from our old culture to go on giving it life. It has to be alive, and being alive, a culture has to interact with surroundings, with other cultures, etc. With the past also, that's very important, but it cannot only live on the past. But there's also a lot of things that are commercially based or based on people following some stupid ideas. I don't, the neo-paganism, as you say, I don't think that this is a very serious thing, although it may be for a few people. Some people study the old religion and try to adapt it to their own world, and although I do not agree with that or don't think it is of significance, I accept it, that's what they want to do. But when people start to make up things mainly in order to charm tourists or sell Iceland to other people by some stupid gadget like new kinds of elves or whatever you like, then I think that's just ridiculous, and I regret it. But there's also...
Okay. So you want to know something about like our take on sea monsters and...
Yes, some kind of, yes.
Yeah, so you want this story when the sea monster attacked me when I was on a fishing boat?
Yes.
Yeah, that was, I was fast asleep in my cabin, and then I woke up, and there was this sea monster was like standing over my bed, just screaming at me. But I was like facing the other way, so I woke up and I said, okay, I'm not gonna move. And then the sea monsters like start screaming and start like kicking the walls. And then I said, okay, this is it. I'm going for the sea monster. But when I turned around, it was just like a delusion, because they were like pulling the nets up and the wind that like pulls the nets, make a sound like wee, and that was the sea monster like screaming. And when the net came up like on the boat, it did like a noise, like everything was shaking, and that was actually the sea monster like banging the walls. So that's the only encounter I've had with sea monsters. But we grew up with stories about sea monsters, like the one called Fjörulalli, which came up from the ocean, and it tries to, like, if you're walking on the beach and the monster came up, it would try to drive you into the ocean. So you had to like run to the mountains before the sea monster would get you. So we were told stories about that, and when I was little, I honestly believed that this monster existed.
It was something dream in the real. What you're talking about?
Yeah, it was just a dream. It was a dream. Like, yeah, I was half awake, half asleep, and as soon as I woke up, I realized it was like, it was just a dream. It's just.
But you feel it as it would be in real.
Yeah. Like when it happened, it felt like it was real. Like, it was. Like, I honestly, when I was laying in the bed, I honestly believed there was a sea monster.
Like what he did look like?
He like in my mind, he just looks like every other monster. It was just a green, pretty big with teeth. So it was your average. I think it was your average Hollywood monster.
First centuries after the settlement of Iceland, and it was very precious for the Icelanders at that time. And in those centuries, the old Icelandic literature was written down. That is the most. The main cultural heritage for us is this old Icelandic literature. In the Middle Ages, we lost our independence, as you know, to the Norwegians at the beginning, and then to the Danish crown. And these were very dark ages, not least the 17th and the 18th century. A lot of people were starving for different reasons, and the fight for independence came again powerful in the 19th century, and it was supported by the population. It was supported by writers and high-ranking individuals in the country. And this has meant a lot, of course, for the development of Iceland, also concerning the industries and the development of the country. The independence, we got the independence, the formal independence, 1918, and 25 years later, Iceland became republic in 1944. And after that time, of course, a lot has changed on the international scene with the new links between countries, also between Iceland and the countries of Europe. And I think, in my view, to keep our independence is quite central to be able to preserve the Icelandic culture and Icelandic tradition. This is easier said than done, certainly, because of the speedy development in all spheres of life in Iceland, like in other countries. And but this should be our aim, to try to preserve our old culture and to develop the new one, the new sprouts in cultural respect. Yes, to pass the the heritage and the culture between generations from within a family. It is not an easy task today. It is, there are so many things who are distracting young people from keeping to the moral and to the thinking of their parents and ancestors. Central, of course, is to preserve the language. The language is the main channel to keep the cultural stream continuous. And today, the Icelandic tongue is not in danger in a way. It is quite everybody is for keeping the Icelandic language and to be able to speak it further. But the influence from English, for example, is of course big here in the country, like in many other European countries. But we are trying to keep these ties between generations.
And people, of course, are very aware of the possibility of other beings besides human or animal. And that tradition is very much alive in this country. So people will do things out of respect for the hidden beings. And at the same time, they are paying respect to nature. Having faith and seeing omens everywhere are people deluding themselves. How people feel that they are answered by a higher being in life. Do you mean me personally? When considering a particular action, you can ask if this is the right thing to do or not, and you can ask for a specific omen to happen within a certain amount of time. So say within the next 48 hours, I want this to happen for it to tell me that this decision is right. People can do that to get confirmation that some higher power is influencing their actions. My personal view to it is that I take responsibility for my life and the actions that I take, which basically means if I go down a course and go down a particular road and things start to go badly wrong, then I stop and I think, maybe I've made a wrong decision. So I go back and I think again and then take a different path. We always have to be ready to accept that we can be wrong. We can only ever make decisions on the information we have at the time. When things go right and the dance of life flows really, really well, and we feel the connection to everything around us, people and everything just is in harmony and goes right and feels right. That's one time when you can feel very connected to a higher being. Feeling that your actions are in harmony with everything around you and everything feels like it's going in the right direction. And everything comes together just right. And another time when I feel very strongly connected to something larger than myself is, for example, when I experienced an earthquake, or when you experience the power of a full gale, a snowstorm, where you can't see anything, you can't stand, and the power of that has to touch something more than just your body. And that is Christian. And you get a Christian priest and an ásatrúargoði working together to create a ceremony that takes place in nature. And they both perform the ceremony. And these ceremonies we have happening more and more often. Sometimes one is Buddhist, sometimes one is Hindu, sometimes whatever else. But a point in a person's life when they actually feel connected with a higher power or something larger than their self those are the points in life that mostly connect with experiences in nature. When somebody sees a fantastic display, a beautiful sunset, northern lights in the sky, they can be pretty awesome. Just today, walking back to work, a huge rainbow formed in front of the mountain Eyrarfjall. And just as I walked further away from it, it looked as if it was going higher and higher. Or if a person stands and they experience an earthquake, those times are the times when nature speaks to your soul. And you can feel not just nature as a raw force, but something behind it, something greater. That means that all of us connect to something much bigger. Another point is to think here in Iceland on a very frosty, clear night and just see the northern lights covering the sky, dancing. It's totally silent, and it is the most amazing display that you can experience, in my view. And even if I'm freezing, I just want to stay out there forever. What do I think about elves? I love elves. Everybody loves elves, unless they upset them. Things around your house will disappear. You will look for them everywhere, and 3 days later, you will find them where you've looked 5 times. Elves are traditionally the kinds of being that humans mostly interact with. And elves, if you do them a favor, will be very helpful to you. Some of them can play tricks on you. And if you upset them, then you're in real trouble. Elves are mysterious, intriguing beings. And very often, people can almost sense them, almost feel them. And lots of people say, I've got elves living in my garden, and they borrow stuff from my house, and that's okay. Some of them leave something out for the elves as a gesture of friendship. So, to me, elves have always been enchanting. And fortunately, we have lots and lots of stories about elves and such beings, which are very fun to read and reread and talk about. And I have so far never met a child that hasn't been interested in elves. Only grown-ups that are way too mature for such things. Because a grown-up thinking about or admitting to believing in elves, of course they are afraid to be considered weird or gullible. But when they get to know you a bit better, well, they're not quite sure whether the elves exist, but they're not going to cross them. When I was a child, I had a very good friend who was an elf, and she lived in a particular hill.
Here?
Yes, when I was growing up here. And my brother played with her brother, and the grown-ups couldn't see them. And when I was about 18, I attended college somewhere else, and the person that stayed in the room with me is very psychic. And that girl gave me a message from my brother's elven friend, basically telling me exactly the right names, and I'd never told her about them. I hadn't talked about them in years. And she told me, she recited exactly, told me what they looked like, told me their names, and gave me a message to my brother. And I found that very interesting, because that's one of those points when I think, okay, so it's not just me. So there, some people find it embarrassing mostly grown-ups find it embarrassing to say that they believe in elves. Those people tend to be between 15 and 35. Before that and after that, most people admit to believing in elves, having direct experience of elves. And mostly this, that people have a positive attitude towards them. What's my attitude to loneliness and which fears to have? I've never had a problem with being on my own. I am comfortable enough in my own skin that I like to spend time on my own. Then a month later I realize if I want to have any friends, I have to actually go see them. There are far too many lonely people in the world because modern life is disconnecting people. People have Facebook friends, but what's missing is people actually going and seeing each other and spending time with each other. If we want to have any kind of worthwhile relationships, we have to invest.
Excited about Icelanders believing in Álfar. And I say to them, actually, this says more about you than it says about me or the people living here. Because you're coming here, and why are you coming here in search of this? And it's partly because of the feeling of loss of the spiritual that used to be, I would say, in Norway, certainly until the 1920s, 30s. In Ireland, you still find it in the west of Ireland amongst the people living there. And Native Americans is still, of course, there, and Africa, Kenya, you still find ideas of magic living quite strongly there too. But Europeans coming to Iceland, they're in search of something that they feel is lost. And it was this magic, this mystery that used to be out there that they grew up hearing about when they were children, and that education has told them that they should not believe in. Because, of course, people love hearing ghost stories, people love hearing about strange dreams and beings living within the landscape. It makes it much more exciting. As Tolkien underlined as well, that after reading his books you look at trees differently, that a tree is a living being that you should show respect for, a little bit like the people in early societies used to understand nature as something that was full of life and spirituality, that you could communicate with, that you were part of. If that answers your question, I think this is the shared element. The simple answer that he ends up giving his life. He was burnt. I'm not really sure if I would say that there has to be a giving to get something back.
I mean, to get the nature be balanced.
But I'm not sure whether there's this sense of balance within the magic that I've come across. There's a balance in the element of joint respect when you're engaging in magic or religion. You're dealing with something more powerful than yourself. So in a sense, you could say your sacrifice is showing your humility to this greater power. Sometimes, I suppose, there are people using parts of their bodies, their blood, or something of this kind, which is the root of any sacrifice in the past. But I don't think the stories of magic that we get in the folk tales, at least, don't talk about having to give something to get something back. I think maybe more in the practices that you'll find in the black books from the West Fjords and elsewhere, that there's some element of giving something, but and certainly the idea of giving is very old. Giving to get something back, that you give something, you want something, you give something, is very old in Iceland. If you go to a poem like Hávamál, it says that you should always give something to get something back. But I can't really give any clearer answer to this. I've not got the knowledge of the practices that maybe people like Siggi have got.
Okay, thank you. And the next?
When I'm teaching Icelandic culture to foreign students, I tell them to take out an Icelandic coin. And on one side is a picture of the protecting spirits of the country. This is the culture, this is culture, this is heritage. The other side is a fish. Let me think a little bit on this. Well, to start off with, certainly the carving of runes. The carving of runes, if you look at the oldest of poems, involves several stages. First of all, it means taking some wood for yourself to cut the outside of it so it's fresh. It's breathing, in a sense. You can see the life within the wood. So you're bringing it to life, and if these are runes that are then they describe how you write the runes on it, and then you put blood onto them or you paint them, and the only way to take this magic away then is to carve it away, to scrape it away. In a sense, what you've done, even without a letter, is you've changed nature. A little bit like the Native Americans have the idea that when you speak, you've changed something because your breath, the air in the room has changed. A word, the air floats as it comes out of your mouth. If you could look at the air, you could see it moving as somebody speaks. So a little, you've changed something, but you've changed nature too. You've altered something that's going to stay that way. Then comes the idea of the meaning of the symbol. That people believe that this particular shape is going to be a message to powers outside. A little bit like sort of waving your hands in a particular way will be a message that will be understood by the spirits elsewhere. This is really all that I can say about that. It's certainly very, very old. The idea of using new wood is very, very old. The idea of having to clean runes off which have been marked there because they've changed the landscape. A little bit like writing any letter down. You've altered something by writing something. It's there. It stays on the page. That page is never the same as it was beforehand. And there's a belief that by doing it in this way, then it brings in humans' belief, that we believe that it changes, it causes something to happen. And that brings us back to the power of words and the power of poetry, especially, which was certainly believed in at the time of the settlement. Poetry was banned, especially love poetry, because it was believed if you wrote a love poem to somebody, you were actually sending magic at her. It sounds like a chant, and all of these connections I mentioned earlier on between words and magic, between poetry and magic, have the same sort of idea that words are control. People also believe that that knowing the name of somebody has power over it. So naming Satan means suddenly he will appear. So instead of this, you talk about Old Nick, or you talk about the guy with horns. Instead of talking about the Álfar, you talk about the good people, or the little people, or the hidden people, because by saying their name, you call them. So this again, it comes back to the power of words and name magic, and the power of writing, which we still believe. We go to universities and we learn words, which we feel give us positions as professors, if we know all of these words and we know how to use them. Sound and movement and the symbol. Yeah, I think all of these go together, because words are initially spoken, but then later on they become written in later times.